Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Um, we always love to hear from you, and we were so struck by something you shared with us recently.
Yeah.
You sent in some really, really powerful thoughts about grief, and it really got us thinking.
hmm
So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at your experience and trying to really dig deep into what it means to grieve.
Mm.
Specifically, you were talking about this kind of intermittent sadness you've been feeling, like these waves of sadness
Right.
that just kind of come out of the blue sometimes.
Yeah.
And this all started after you found out that someone you knew from school had passed away.
Right.
And I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling. When someone close to your age dies,
Yeah.
it really makes you think about your own mortality.
Yeah.
You know,
Really puts things in perspective.
Absolutely. And what's so interesting about your experience is that you're not grieving constantly. It's these, like you said, moments, these waves that kind of come out of nowhere.
Mm.
And you also mentioned that this wasn't someone you were super close to, but, you shared a certain history, you went to school together, you were both around the same age.
Mm.
So, our mission today is to really try and understand this. Why do these waves of sadness hit so hard, even when, like you said, your life overall feels good and meaningful?
It's a great question. And I think, one of the things that's so powerful about your experience is that it highlights just how much we kind of try to avoid thinking about death. Like it's this big, scary thing that we just push to the back of our minds.
Right.
But then something like this happens. Someone your age dies, and it's like a crack in that armor.
Yeah.
Suddenly, death feels very real and very personal, and all those defenses we've built up start to crumble.
And it's not just that it's personal, it's that it's someone who's like you, someone who started out in the same place.
Exactly. And I think that's why it can be so unsettling. It's like looking in a mirror and seeing a possible future, a future that's suddenly been taken away.
That reminds me of something you mentioned in your notes, terror management theory.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah, terror management theory.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
So basically, it's this idea that when we're confronted with our own mortality, it can actually trigger this like really intense need to find meaning in life.
Ah,
Like when we're reminded that our time is limited, we start to grasp for things that make our lives feel valuable.
it's like, okay, if this is all going to end someday, then what am I doing to make it count?
Exactly. And, in your case, even though you weren't super close with this person from school, the fact that she was your age, the fact that you shared that similar background, I think it creates this sense of that could have been me.
Right.
And that can be really, really scary.
Yeah, and it's not just about fear, right? It's about sadness, too. Like
Mhm.
a sadness for all the things that this person will never get to experience.
Absolutely. And it's a sadness that can kind of bleed into our own lives. It makes us question our own choices, our own paths. Like, are we making the most of our time? Are we living in a way that feels authentic and meaningful?
That's a good point. So it's not just grieving for this person, but also grieving for, like you said, the potential futures.
Right. And I think that's a big part of what makes these waves of sadness so powerful. It's like this sudden realization of all the things that could be lost.
And that brings us to the really interesting part.
Yeah.
Because alongside this sadness, you're also experiencing this really deep appreciation for life,
Right.
for your loved ones, for your creative pursuits. And, on the surface, those two things seem like total opposites.
Yeah.
So how does that work? How can you be so sad about death and yet so full of life at the same time?
Well, it might seem contradictory, but it's actually a really natural response. And
Yeah.
in many ways, it's a really healthy response.
Oh.
Because when we confront mortality, even indirectly, it can completely shift our perspective. Well, it's like suddenly we're seeing everything in a new light. The things that we used to take for granted become precious. The relationships that we maybe neglected become so much more important. And it's not just about the big things either. It's about appreciating the little moments, the everyday joys,
Yeah.
the simple things that make life beautiful.
So it's like the awareness of death actually makes us more alive.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Viktor Frankl in your notes
Right.
and his work on finding meaning in suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really relevant here because Frankl believed that even in the darkest of times, we can still find meaning. We can still choose to live with purpose.
So even though we're aware of our own mortality,
Yeah.
we don't have to give in to despair.
Exactly. We can choose to focus on the things that matter to us. We can choose to live in a way that feels authentic and meaningful.
And that reminds me of another concept you mentioned, memento mori.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So memento mori is a Latin phrase that means remember that you must die. And it's this ancient idea that by reflecting on death, we can actually live better lives.
So it's not about being morbid or dwelling on the negative. It's about using the awareness of death as a way to motivate us to live more fully.
Precisely. It's about appreciating the time we have and making the most of it.
You know, it's funny because we often think of sadness and appreciation as being these like opposite emotions.
Yeah.
But in this case, it seems like they're actually working together.
I think you're absolutely right. It's like the sadness is reminding you of what you stand to lose, which makes the good things in your life feel even more precious.
And the appreciation for life makes the thought of death even more significant.
Exactly. They're two sides of the same coin.
So for our listener out there who's going through something similar, it's important to know that these feelings are totally normal.
Absolutely. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel confused. It's okay to feel all of the things.
And it's also okay to feel happy, to feel grateful, to feel a deep love for life.
Right. These aren't contradictory emotions. They're all part of the human experience.
And I think your experience really highlights the incredible capacity we have to hold all of these different emotions at the same time.
I agree. It's what makes us human.
So to wrap up today, we've taken this deep dive into grief, exploring how the death of an acquaintance can trigger these waves of sadness and lead to profound reflections on the fragility of life. But we've also seen how this experience can coexist with a deep appreciation for life, for the people, and things that bring us joy.
And it's important to remember that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Everyone experiences it differently.
And as you continue to navigate these feelings, our listener, we want to leave you with a final thought. How might this heightened awareness of the finite nature of time, not just how you think about life, but how you actually choose to live each day? We really hope this deep dive has given you some new perspectives on this complex and ultimately very personal experience.
We hope so too. And thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.